Hello dear viewer of my channel. Emily is with you. For the most interesting stories, watch the video until the end. Subscribe and like the video, I will be very pleased. I love you all.
Story time about how my date turned out to be a serial killer. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. I recently got promoted at my job and had to move to a new city. I didn't know anyone in this new city, so I decided to sign up for some dating apps. Within a few days, I was already talking to some guys. One of them in particular was really nice and I could tell he was really trying to get to know me. So I gave him my phone number. From there, we texted for about a full week. He would say good morning and good night. He would always ask me questions and act like he was just really interested in me. I decided that I really liked him and I told him. That's when he asked me if I wanted to go on a date, and of course, I said yes. We decided to meet up for dinner during the weekend. On the morning of the date, I sent him a text message saying good morning. I didn't hear anything back from him. At first, I thought maybe he's just stuck at work. An hour before the date, I still hadn't heard from him, so I decided to send him a text, and he did not reply. So of course, I ended up going to dinner by myself anyway. But when I got home, I had a message from him apologizing for standing me up. When I asked him what happened, he told me that he got stuck at work. And I decided to believe him. I had no reason not to trust him. I decided to give him a second chance when he asked me out again. The following weekend, we decided to have a picnic. But same thing, a few hours before the date, I still hadn't heard from him. That's when I sent him a message asking him if he was going to show up or not. And I didn't hear anything from him for a few hours. Finally, he messaged me once again saying that he got stuck at work. He begged me for another chance, and I said yes. A few days later on the news, I saw that two women had disappeared after going on a date with some guy. And both of the women had disappeared in the area that I lived in. When I told my parents about it, they urged me not to go on any dates. So I decided not to tell them that I actually had a date that week. The following day, we meet at the restaurant. As soon as I see him, he's really sweaty and nervous. And when he hugged me, he smelled really bad. As in B.O. I didn't want to judge him, but I asked him if he was okay. That's when he told me that he'd been working every single day nonstop. Then I look at his fingernails and they're full of dirt and what seemed like some red stuff. I asked him what he did for work again, and you'll never guess what he said. He said he was in mergers and acquisitions. Then he laughed. This is where it gets scary. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my date turned out to be a serial unaliver. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. On the date, I noticed that his fingernails were dirty, he was really sweaty, and he smelled really bad. When I asked him what he did again for a living, he told me he was in mergers and acquisitions. Then he started laughing maniacally. He told me it was a joke and it was a line from one of his favorite movies, American Psycho. I tried to laugh it off with him, but I just couldn't get past his whole demeanor. Then he started just doing bizarre things. He ordered tons of food, steak, chicken, pasta, nachos, salad, and he ate all of it. But the way he was eating was so aggressive, it was like he hadn't eaten in days. By the way, at this point, we hadn't followed each other on social media. So I told him I wanted to go to the bathroom. When I got to the bathroom, I started looking up his Instagram. He had a profile, but not many pictures on it. Then I started looking through his tagged pictures, but again, nothing. It was like he didn't exist outside of the dating app. I decided I'd stay for the date, but then I wouldn't speak to him again. When I got back to the table, he started asking me a lot of questions. Like, did I live by myself? Have I ever shot any weapons? I mean, what kind of question is that on a first date? Then out of nowhere, he asked me if I wanted to go to his lake house. He quickly pulled up his phone and showed me a few pictures. I finally asked him again what he did for a living. He told me that his parents are very wealthy and they own several ranches, and that he basically did all the marketing for them. Then he abruptly ended the date. I mean, trust me, I wanted to go home anyway, but it's the way he did it. I told him I probably wouldn't have time to go to the lake house. Then he called a server over and gave them his black card, which is a pretty good indication if someone has money. Then he went to the bathroom. At this point, I just wanted to make a run for it. He comes back out, grabs his card from the server, and tells me good night. As we're walking out of the restaurant, he stops me and tries to kiss me. Of course, I turned my face away. Then he said, "Ah, you're a fighter, aren't ya?" He then got in his car and simply drove away without saying a word. The following day on the news, I hear about another missing woman. Part 3 is up. Part 2 of how my date turned out to be a serial unaliver. Disclaimers is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. If you haven't seen part 2, go watch it. The following day, I hear that another woman is missing. This is when they showed a description of the man they think kidnapped the women, and it looked exactly like my date. They even mentioned the dating app that he used, which is the same one we met on. So I decided that after work, I would go to the police myself. I spoke to the detective and gave him all the information. His name, his social media, his dating profile, and I even told him about how he behaved on the first date. Later on that night, I got home and blocked him from everything. 2 days later, the police show up to my job and told me that they caught him. And when they went to search his lake house, they found the missing women. Apparently, he would lure women to his lake house and keep them there for days, eventually unaliving them. The police told me that if I hadn't followed my instincts, I might have ended up like they did. He's now in maximum prison, and somehow he managed to send me a letter. I burnt it as soon as I got it. Apparently, he still wants to talk to me. Never trust someone you meet online. Story time about how my half-sister tries to steal all of my boyfriends. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm currently 24 years old and I didn't meet my half-sister till about a year ago. She's 22, so she's 2 years younger than I am. My parents have a really complicated past. They divorced when I was really young, and they pretty much never spoke after the divorce. What I didn't know back then was the reason why they got divorced until now. When I was 3 years old, my mom found out that my dad had a child with another woman. It was totally heartbreaking for my mom, and I totally understand looking back. Fast forward 20 years later, my mom and my dad started speaking again. They kind of wanted just to get over all the past stuff and just be friends. I was really happy about this because I've always wanted this for my parents. Throughout the years, I kept a decent relationship with my dad, but we were never really close. So once my mom and my dad started making up, I started having more of a relationship with my dad too. And I also knew that I did have a half-sister somewhere in the world, so I was excited to meet her. We all decided to go have dinner, and that's when I met my half-sister. I assumed that her and I were just going to become really good friends because we were so close in age and we had the same dad. I mean, she's my half-sister. But I couldn't be more wrong. As soon as we met, she didn't even want to give me a hug. My mom was so upset by it that she even confronted her and asked her what her problem was. And in front of everyone at the dinner, she told my mom and I that she had no desire to get to know us, and that she didn't even consider us family. My mom and I left the dinner and basically didn't speak to her for a long time. But of course, my dad, being my dad, forced her to call my mom and I to apologize. Of course, this was all super awkward. She apologized and we went about our lives. Right before Thanksgiving, I started dating someone new. He was really amazing, we got along super well and had tons of fun. My mom loved him. That year, we decided to join the two families and have one big Thanksgiving dinner. I knew my half-sister was going to be there, so I talked to my mom and told her to just have patience in case she said something to us. As soon as we show up to the house, my half-sister goes straight to my boyfriend and starts talking to him. At first, I didn't really get annoyed at all because I thought at least she was being nice. But boy, was I wrong. She spent the whole night talking trash about me to my boyfriend. My boyfriend kept looking over at me and making weird faces, so I went over there and asked him how they were. That's when my half-sister literally looks at me and just walks away. Then my boyfriend fills me in on everything that she said about me. She told him that I was dating 3 other guys behind his back. Thankfully, he didn't believe her, of course. But after this, she basically stalked him on Instagram and wouldn't leave him alone. She even got his phone number and started sending him messages. And the only reason I found out was because I saw a message come in through his phone. When I confronted my boyfriend about it, he told me that it was totally innocent and that I needed to get over it. And yes, my half-sister is very pretty. But I got really upset at my boyfriend and decided we needed to take a break. That's when she swooped in. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my half-sister tries to steal all of my boyfriends. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After she stalked my boyfriend and started sending him messages, told him we needed to take a break because I saw the messages on his phone. And he didn't tell me. Instead of confronting her, I decided to call my dad and tell him what she was doing. That's when my dad told me that he was sick of us being children and that we both needed to mature. I mean, I wasn't the one stalking her boyfriend. Since that failed, I went straight to my half-sister. I told her she needed to leave me alone and to never speak to me again. That's when she literally denied everything that she had been doing. She told me that my boyfriend was making all that stuff up and that she would never do that. Of course, I didn't believe her. After a few weeks, I call my ex and tell him that I'm ready to talk again. That's when he told me that he actually started dating my half-sister. I couldn't believe it. Once again, I called my dad and told him what she was doing. And when he asked her about it, she denied having ever done that. She even told my dad that she wasn't dating him. So at this point, it was her word against mine. I decided to just move on with my life and I started dating new people. Once again, I meet a really good guy. I told him I wanted to take things slow and he said he understood. We were out to dinner one night and I decided to tag him in one of my stories. A few days later, he asks me if I have a half-sister and I said yes. That's when he sent me a screenshot of a conversation he had with her. And again, she was telling him that I was dating a bunch of other guys. She even asked him if they could meet up for coffee. I told him to block her and completely ignore her. A few days after that, my ex, who left me for my half-sister, calls me up and tells me that she broke up with him. He told me that I was right about her, that she was toxic and totally demented. He then begged me to give him another chance. Once again, I go to my dad and I show him all the screenshots of her messaging my boyfriends. Finally, my dad believed me. My dad and I both confronted her and she denied everything once again. But then, the new guy that I'm seeing sent me another screenshot. She apparently messaged him from another number and asked him out again. I don't know what to do at this point. She keeps denying having done anything. In fact, I'm almost scared of her. What should I do? Part 2 of how I stole a famous celebrity's boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I knew I had to make my move now or it would be never. The fact that he came in 2 days later and by himself, that let me know that he liked me. Like I said in part 1, he was there for a few hours. We totally hit it off. We even talked about each other's families and what our favorite foods were. So that's when I asked him if he wanted to have a quick dinner. Trust me, I was so nervous to ask him, but I knew I had to do it. And he said yes. We finally got to the restaurant and sat all the way in the back. I kind of got the feeling that he didn't want anyone to see us, but it made sense. That's when I asked about his famous girlfriend. Then he quickly apologized for her behavior and told me that she's never really like that. And I told him that I'm used to being treated that way by celebrities. And he said that I didn't deserve that kind of behavior from her. That's when I asked him if he was happy with her. I could tell the question caught him off guard because he didn't really know how to respond. And that's when he told me that he was happy with her, but he didn't know if the relationship would actually go anywhere. We proceeded to have a few drinks, and I could tell this was really loosening us up. Out of nowhere, I grabbed his hand and kind of massaged it, but he didn't pull it away. That just confirmed the fact that he liked me. Then he asked me for my phone number. We said goodnight and went our separate ways. But for the next week, he texted me every single day saying good morning. Of course, we would text pretty much all day long. I finally decided to tell him how I felt, which he obviously already knew, and he told me that he felt the same. Then he was the one that asked me out, and we actually went to the beach. We were at the beach for about 6 hours and we had such a great time. At the end of the beach day, I kissed him and asked him if he really wanted to be with his girlfriend. He stayed quiet and didn't answer, but the following day he messaged me and told me that he broke up with her. Here's the bad news. We only dated for 3 weeks. On the 3rd week, he actually broke up with me and told me he was dating someone else. I saw it coming. He's now dating another celebrity. Their relationship isn't public yet, but I have a feeling they're gonna announce it soon. I keep texting him and asking him to take me back. I was actually falling in love with him. What should I do, you guys?
Story time about how I'm still in love with my toxic ex. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is really complicated, but please hear me out before you start judging me in the comments. Ex and I dated for exactly 1 year. When we first met, he was super charming, cute. I mean, he was like the perfect boyfriend. My family loved him, but gradually he started changing. The more serious we got about the relationship, the worse he became. For example, at the beginning of our relationship, we always used to hang out with our friends. And sometimes I would hang out with my own friends on my own. But 2 months into the relationship, he began guilting me. He would tell me that I would rather hang out with my friends, which wasn't even true. And then I would end up staying home and then he would go out with his friends. He would also tell my parents sometimes that I needed to be taught lessons, like how to respect men and stuff. My parents detested him. One time he came over for Thanksgiving and basically told me that I needed to go change my clothes. He even said that I looked like a whore in front of my cousin. After that, my cousin really hated him and began doing her own research. She found that he was liking girls' pictures on Instagram and that he was leaving dirty comments on their pictures. Once she found all this information, she told me and I confronted him. He told me that he had every right to comment on anyone's pictures because it was just the internet and it wasn't real life. I kind of had to accept what he said because I didn't want any more problems. I asked my cousin to stop searching stuff, but she just didn't let up. Almost every single week, she would send me screenshots of things that he'd comment on girls' pictures. Finally, I told my boyfriend that my cousin had found all this out, and he basically forced me to cut her out of my life. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would I stay with him? But when things were good, they were really good. He was super loving, affectionate. He always wanted to be with me and he always prioritized going on dates and having fun. He would always surprise me with fun things. One time he planned this beautiful picnic and we even stayed in the park and spent the night there. But then he would manage to ruin everything by becoming really jealous and controlling.
My dream job was to work in marketing, and I just happened to land this internship at a really popular fashion magazine. When I told him I got the job, he acted really strange. He didn't even congratulate me. A few hours later, he told me that I was trying too hard and that he didn't want a girlfriend that was going to be at work all the time. He also asked me how much I was going to be getting paid because he wanted to make sure it was less than what he earned. So in other words, he was jealous and envious at the same time. Then he insisted that I work around his schedule, so I could only work the days that he was working. Then he told me that if I wasn't spending enough time with him because of my new job, he would break up with me. I took that as the last straw. It was my dream job, but he was making everything terrible. While my entire family was so happy for me, I was crying in bed at night. The next morning, I woke up and texted him and told him that I didn't want to see him. He ran straight to my house. We got in his car to talk and I proceeded to tell him everything I thought. Then he turned it all around and told me that I wasn't the girl that he fell in love with, and that if I didn't change, he would break up with me. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm still in love with my extremely toxic ex. After I told him that I needed him to change, he basically turned everything around and told me that I wasn't the girl that he fell in love with anymore, and that I was the one that needed to change if I wanted to continue in the relationship. And to top it all off, he kicked me out of his car. We didn't speak for about 2 weeks. During that time, I started at my dream job and everything was actually going pretty well. I didn't have the pressure on top of me about him not wanting me to work, and my life was actually getting better. My skin started clearing up and I even started losing weight. In other words, I was really happy. My parents and family were so happy too. But then I see that he starts posting other girls on his Instagram. I knew that he was doing it on purpose, so I tried not to get upset, but I just couldn't help it. Then I made a huge mistake. I messaged him and asked him if he still loved me. Then he called me and we talked on the phone for about 4 hours. By the end of the phone call, we were back together. And guess what? We even agreed to moving in together. I made him promise that he wouldn't be jealous anymore and that he would stop trying to control everything I did. He promised up and down that he would never be that way again. But literally 3 days later, he comes over super drunk, demanding you know what. I said no because my parents were home and I wasn't gonna do that in the house with them. Then of course he starts threatening me again, saying that if I don't do it, I don't love him and blah blah blah. So I took advantage and I kicked him out of the house. Then he sent me an essay of a text message breaking up with me and telling me how he doesn't love me anymore. It's been 2 months since that happened. Once again, I'm doing great at work. My family and I are super happy, but I actually miss him. Not only do I miss him, I'm so jealous all the time because I see he's posting girls on his Instagram. I miss being with him and I miss having fun with him, but I don't miss always feeling scared and nervous. I even tried dating a few guys, but nobody compares to him. A few weeks ago, I went on a date with this really nice guy. We connected and went on a few more dates. I posted on my story that I was on a date and my ex went crazy. He actually showed up at the restaurant and told me to come out and talk to him. And I did. I literally left the guy that I was on a date with to go speak to my ex. He told me to leave with him and I said no. He grabbed my purse and threw it on the ground and told me that he would never speak to me again. 3 days later, he was back in my messages begging to see me. But the guy that I was on a date with actually really likes me and asked me to be his girlfriend. I don't know what to do. I love my ex and I want to get back with him, but I know he's crazy. But this new guy's really nice and really caring. What do I do?
Story time about how I faked being pregnant for 6 months. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram.
I'm in my late 20s and I have a really successful career. I make plenty of money, I own my own house, and I have 2 cars. But I've always failed in relationships. I had a long-term relationship in my early 20s, but I broke up with him because he just wasn't pulling his weight. I paid for our extravagant lifestyle. He would basically help me with my work and then expect me to pay him. Also, I paid the rent, I paid for the cars, and I paid for every single dinner date we ever had. We also had a joint bank account, which was a huge mistake on my part, because ultimately I was the one earning all the money. After 4 years of dating, I decided to break up with him and I told him to move out of my house. I felt free and I started dating right away. I met this guy one night and he was amazing. He complimented me all the time and made me feel really good about myself. But here's the problem, I tend to fall in love really easily. After that night, that guy and I would talk every single day. He would come over to my place and we would have dinner. But the good thing about this guy was that he had his own money and he was pretty wealthy. His family was also really well off. I totally saw myself marrying this guy, but then eventually we broke up. I found out that he was cheating on me, but also he was doing some illegal stuff in the background. I decided to forgive him for the cheating and everything, but he still wanted to break up. I mean, I was totally shocked because I was forgiving him, but he had no intention of being in a committed relationship with me. So once again, I was single. I decided not to focus on guys at all. Instead, I started going out with my friends and focusing on my career. But you know how it goes. When you're not looking for love, it just knocks on your door. Which it kind of literally happened like that. I had some friends come over and they decided to bring some other people that I didn't know. There was one guy that showed up and I knew of him because he was friends with my other friends. He was really cute and we hit it off right away. He asked me out on a date, but I kept saying no because I just didn't want to get into anything. But he really won me over with his personality and I ended up saying yes. And after our first date, I literally thought I was falling in love with him. Like, here I go again. This time I knew that if I got into a relationship with this guy, he had to marry me. So early on in the relationship, I told him that my intention was to marry him, and if his intention wasn't to marry me, then we needed to stop dating. He promised me up and down that he did want to marry me, so I stayed in the relationship. I knew that I wanted him to move in right away, which I know sounds crazy, but I was kind of desperate at this point. My goal in life was to have kids, and I just wasn't getting there. It took me about a week to convince him to move in, and he finally said yes. But he basically told me that he wanted to continue living his life the way he had been before. In other words, he wanted to continue hanging out with his friends whenever he wanted, and I said fine. I was just happy he was committing to something. Then I realized I had to get pregnant in order to tie him down. Part 2
part 2 of how I faked a pregnancy for 6 months in order to keep my boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After I finally convinced him to move in, I knew that I needed to get pregnant as soon as possible. My goal in life is to be a mom, and because I had so many failed relationships, I knew that I needed to make this one work.
The first 2 months of living with my boyfriend were really good, but of course I quickly wanted to get pregnant. I also knew that the only way he would marry me was if I got pregnant, so I got to work. I stopped taking the pill and I didn't tell him, which I know sounds terrible, but here's the problem. I was not getting pregnant. I was off the pill for 3 weeks and nothing happened. I got so desperate, I went to the mall and got a pregnant woman to pee on a stick, which of course came out with a positive result. I went home that night and showed my boyfriend the stick, and he was so surprised. He asked me if I was taking the pill, which I said yes, but he got really upset and told me that I probably got pregnant on purpose, which I denied. But then he said the magical words. He said, "I guess we have to get married now." I was so beyond happy, but the problem was that I really wasn't pregnant. So I started gaining weight like crazy. Anytime he left the house, I would eat tons of junk food. I would go late at night to the supermarket and buy tons of junk food. I get Doritos, chips, cookies, and cake and ice cream. I basically ate anything that was sugary. 2 months later, I had gained about 30 pounds, and it looked like I was really pregnant. But my relationship started to fall apart. My boyfriend was upset all the time, blaming me for having gotten pregnant. 6 months into my fake pregnancy, he decided to break up with me. I begged him, but he said he didn't want to be with me and that he needed to be free. That's when I dropped the whole charade and told him I wasn't pregnant. He literally blew up in my face. He actually grabbed a chair and threw it into the TV. He grabbed his stuff and ran away. Of course, he blocked me from everything so I couldn't contact him. 3 days later, 2 of my cars had been stolen from my driveway, and part of me knew that it was him. But a week after that, he actually reached out and asked me if I wanted to try at the relationship again. But here's the thing, he doesn't have much money, so he can't live the lifestyle I was giving him. I'm pretty sure he only wants to come back because of the money, but I kind of still love him. What should I do?
Story time about how my brother caught me making out with his girlfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Growing up, I didn't have a really good relationship with my parents or with my brother. The only person that I did get along with was my sister. You see, we're kind of a religious family. When I was 15, I knew that I liked girls, but there was no way that I would tell my parents that I did. They would never accept that their daughter liked other girls. I basically suppressed all of those feelings for about 5 years. When I turned 20, I decided to come out to my sister. My sister was super open, accepting, and she was really loving about it. She never once made me feel bad. I asked her what she thought about me telling the rest of the family, and she said definitely not. She knew that our parents would freak. I finally got my first girlfriend a year after that. I actually met her on my 21st birthday. At this point, I still live with my parents, so I basically said that she was a best friend of mine. My parents, of course, believed me because they had no other reason not to. She would come over to my house, and we would just spend time together there. She eventually got really upset that I would never tell my parents about us, and she decided to break up with me because of it. Of course, I was brokenhearted about it, but 3 weeks later, I met my brother's now girlfriend. Right off the bat, we got along really well. Like I said before, I never had a really good relationship with my brother. He suspected that I liked girls, but he never came out and told me. But because of this, there was always tension between us. Also, I never understood why his girlfriend liked him because he has no personality and zero sense of humor, which is honestly why I think her and I got along so well. Anytime she came over to our house, I would just find her so funny. My brother had to go out of town for work, so she invited me to go out with her friends for lunch. Of course, I quickly accepted. I honestly didn't realize it at the time, but I was definitely developing a crush on her. She was my kind of girl. I mean, I guess my brother and I have the same type. She was funny and incredibly smart. After that lunch, she asked me if I wanted to hang out another 2 times when my brother was away. Everything was going pretty well, but after the 3rd time that we hung out, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I knew this was going to be a really big problem for me. I'm the kind of person that's always honest with people as much as I can. When my brother finally came back, she started coming over to the house more. I was both excited but worried at the same time because I knew that I had feelings for her. One day she came over, but there was nobody home. That's when I decided to be honest with her and tell her the truth. I opened up to her and told her my history and that I had a crush on her. She smiled and told me that it was okay. That's when she grabbed my hand and we started kissing. Trust me, I know that it's totally wrong because she's my brother's girlfriend, but I was falling in love with her. That's when my brother comes in and sees us making out. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my brother caught me making out with his girlfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. That's when my brother comes in and catches me making out with his girlfriend. He instantly went berserk and started punching a hole through a wall. His girlfriend tried to calm him down, but he told her that if she touched him, he would probably end up hitting her. Luckily, no one else in the house was home, but my brother threatened to tell my parents.
Like I said in part 1, my parents are very religious, and I knew that they would never accept me as I am. That's when my brother said that he had already been suspecting of me and his girlfriend because her and I had been hanging out so much. He then started calling me a bunch of names like freak and other really inappropriate things. Then the fight became about him and his girlfriend. His girlfriend started telling him that she had been miserable the whole time that she was with him and that he had been manipulating her the whole time. She told him he was even toxic, which I can believe because my brother's kind of like that. She then left the house and told him that she never wanted to see him again. My brother started asking me a bunch of questions like how long I had been seeing her. I told him that this was the first time her and I had ever kissed. Then he told me that I needed a man to teach me how to be a woman. So instead of staying and arguing with him, I decided to leave. I decided to go ahead and tell my parents the truth before my brother did. I was absolutely petrified. I told my parents that I like girls, and I told them what had happened with my brother's girlfriend. That's when my dad told me that they weren't upset that I like girls, and that they would have accepted me either way. But they were really upset that I had hurt my brother's feelings, and that I caused them to break up. They were surprisingly okay with what I had told them. I mean, after years of being petrified of them knowing the truth, I felt so free. But I also told them that my brother had been toxic towards her and that's why she didn't want to be with him anymore. My parents actually ended up being more angry with my brother than with me. But you'll never guess, a few months later my brother told my parents that he's bi. I haven't contacted my brother's ex, but I really feel like I should. I mean, I was falling in love with her. What do you guys think I should do? P.S. My brother's much happier.
Story time about how I did the you-know-what with my celebrity crushes.
Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm from a really small town in the Midwest. Growing up, I knew I wanted to go to LA and be famous. As soon as I turned 20, I decided to move to LA. Showed up to LA with $400 in a dream. My dream was to meet all of my celebrity crushes. I happened to be tall and pretty good looking, so I got myself a modeling agency. A few weeks after I got to LA, I booked my first job. I got to model for a runway show. From there, I met a stylist who introduced me to a bunch of people. And from that, I was able to start going to a bunch of industry parties. I met tons of celebrities, influencers, and basically socialites. I even met Kim Kardashian at a party 4 years ago. When I would go to these parties, I would tell people that I was a model. But in order to prove that, I had to have a pretty big following on Instagram. So I took all of my savings that I had and I bought myself 100,000 followers on Instagram. With those 100,000 followers, I was able to get verified. And after that, I started DMing as many celebrities as I could, especially my celebrity crushes. And no, I won't say who they are. After a few weeks, I still didn't have the responses that I wanted, aka from my celebrity crushes, but I started getting some responses from other celebrities. Not as famous or good looking, but still people that could definitely help me get to them. Basically, my life consisted of going to castings, go-sees, and going to photo shoots. I also started doing music videos, and this is when it really got interesting. I started meeting tons of rappers and started getting invited to bigger and bigger parties. Like, really exclusive parties. The kind where you couldn't take your phone in, and the kind where you had to sign an NDA to make sure that you couldn't say anything about what you saw at the party. My Instagram was also growing really quickly. I went from 100,000 followers to 150,000 within a few months. I even became really good friends with some celebrities that worked on TV shows, like the kind of TV shows that you guys see on Netflix. I felt like I was getting closer and closer to my dream, but still, I never met my celebrity crushes at any of those parties. One morning, I wake up to a few DMs on my Instagram, and it was one of my celebrity crushes. I basically sent him a message just saying, "Hey, I'm in town, I'd love to take you out for a drink." And he replied with a yes. Nothing else, just a yes. I quickly replied and asked him if he wanted to go for a drink that night. He agreed to meeting up at a bar on Sunset Boulevard. I want you guys to understand something though. I was looking for a boyfriend, not just a one night, you know. So I wore my cutest outfit, nothing sexy. I basically looked like a Chanel model from the 1950s. As soon as he saw me, he told me that I was beautiful and we got to talking. Everything was going really great. After that, you know what happened. But here's the thing. I messaged him on Instagram the next day and he didn't reply. He didn't even ask me for my phone number. I got really sad, but the next day I opened up my DMs to another celebrity crush. Part 2 is up.
Part 2 of how I did it with my celebrity crushes. So after I had my date with my biggest celebrity crush ever, he never called me back. But the very next day, I wake up to a DM from another celebrity crush. Now, I didn't think this one would respond because he was in a relationship at the time. No, I'm not going to say who it is. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. He was super nice over DM and asked me if I wanted to go have lunch. I said yes, of course. We decided to have lunch on the weekend. Throughout the week, he would message me and ask me how I was. But 2 days before the meeting, he totally ghosted me. I didn't hear back from him at all. So the day before the date, I texted him. He finally replied and told me that he had been working. We decided to have dinner and he started asking me tons of questions, like if I had a boyfriend, and I told him I was totally single. When I asked him if he had a girlfriend, he stayed quiet. He said he didn't want to answer that question. Of course I knew he had a girlfriend because it was all over the tabloids. Like there were tons of paparazzi pictures of them together. But here's the thing. We had a fancy dinner. Then he asked me if I want to go back to his place. Of course I said yes. And when I get there, I see pictures of him with his girlfriend, the one he didn't want to talk about before. I then go to the bathroom, open the cabinets, and it's full of girl stuff. I quickly realized that he took me to his girlfriend's place to, you know what? I mean, maybe they had an open relationship, but at the same time, like, why would he take me to his girlfriend's place? But I kept my goal in mind. We finally, you know what? And then afterward, he asked me if I wanted to sleep over. That's when I told him no, because I knew that we were in his girlfriend's place. He starts laughing and tells me that she's out of town and that she'll never find out that he took me there. I asked him how many girls he's taken there before, and once again, he said he didn't want to answer the question. He then hit me up every single day for like a month. I didn't know if I should see him again because of the whole girlfriend thing, but then I got another DM. Part 3 is up.
Part 3 about how I did it with my celebrity crushes. Clearly, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. So finally, my third celebrity crush DMs me back. No, I'm not going to say who it was, but he's pretty famous. He actually invited me over to his place for dinner. He ordered some takeout and we watched a movie. We finally got down to it, to you know what, and it was really bad. And the worst part is, afterward, he asked me if it was good. Of course, I lied and said, yes, it was great. The look of relief on his face was apparent. How could it be so insecure being so famous and so attractive? I didn't get it. I actually did go out with him 2 more times, but I kind of got bored of him. Remember the second celebrity I told you about in part 2? He started getting really crazy. He would call me and text me all the time, and when I wouldn't answer, he would send me messages asking where I was. He became super jealous and controlling. I decided to block him, but I'm now considering if I should maybe unblock him, because the other celebrities I DM'd haven't DM'd me back. But I have a whole new list of celebrities I'm going to be DMing. Should I text number 2 back? What do you guys think?